There is a sign on Badwater Road in Death Valley that reads, "Next services 72 miles, not next town, not next gas station, next services," because out here the word town would be generous. That sign is not a suggestion. It is a warning dressed in highway bureaucracy, placed there by people who have seen what happens when you pass it on a quarter tank and keep driving anyway. People make that decision every single year. Some of them are never found. The geography of consequence. Before we talk about fuel gauges and gas prices and the specific ways this valley has killed people, we need to talk about the valley itself, because Death Valley is not simply a hot desert. Hot deserts exist all over the American West. Phoenix is hot, the Mojave is hot, parts of eastern Oregon get genuinely unpleasant in July. Death Valley is something else entirely. It is a machine, and the machine is designed not by any human intent, but by pure geology, to generate heat in quantities that should not be possible at the surface of the Earth. The valley runs roughly north to south, a long, narrow trough caught between two mountain ranges. The Panamint Range sits to the west. The Amargosa Range walls it off to the east. At its lowest point, Badwater Basin, the floor sits 282 feet below sea level. That is the lowest point in all of North America. 85 miles to the west, Mount Whitney rises to over 14,500 feet, the highest point in the lower 48 states. The greatest elevation change on the continent happens across a distance you could theoretically drive in a single afternoon if you could find a road that went straight through. You cannot. Here's the mechanism, and it is worth understanding because it explains everything else. During summer, sunlight strikes the valley floor, dark rock, salt flats, sand, almost no vegetation, and heats that surface to temperatures that seem incompatible with the continuation of life. In July of 1972, ground temperature at Furnace Creek was measured at 201 degrees Fahrenheit. 201, that is 11 degrees short of the boiling point of water. You could not set your bare foot on that surface for a single second without injury. The air above it heats rapidly, rises, hits the steep mountain walls on either side, and gets pushed back down into the valley where it heats again. The valley acts like an oven with the door closed. The mountains trap the hot air. The prevailing winds blow east to west, but the valley runs north to south, so no cross breeze ever cuts through to flush the heat out. The air just recycles. It gets hotter. On July 10, 1913, the weather station at Furnace Creek recorded an air temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. That reading remains, as of right now, the official world record for the highest air temperature ever measured on the surface of the Earth. Some meteorologists dispute it. The World Meteorological Organization still recognizes it. But here is the thing. Even if you throw out the 1913 reading entirely, the temperatures that Death Valley routinely produces are extraordinary enough without the record. In August 2020, Furnace Creek hit 130 degrees. July 2021, 130 again. The summer of 1996 saw 40 days above 120 degrees. 105 days above 110, and in 2001, the temperature stayed above 100 degrees for 154 consecutive days. 154 days. That is the entire summer, and then some, without a single day of relief. At night, it does not cool down the way people expect. On July 5, 1918, the lowest temperature recorded that entire day was 110 degrees. 110. That is still higher than the all-time record high in every single New England state, in New York, in Maryland, in Florida. This is a place where nighttime does not bring rescue. The park itself covers 5,270 square miles. That is larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined, nearly the size of Connecticut. The drive from one end to the other on the main road takes roughly 2.5 hours. And the main road is one of the only roads most people should be on. Get off it, and distances stop meaning what you think they mean. Miles become something different when you are in a dead car, in 120 degrees of heat, 8 miles from a dirt track that nobody is likely to drive on that day, or the next. 3 gas stations. Within those 5,270 square miles, there are 3 gas stations. 3. I want you to sit with that for a second. An area the size of a New England state. 3 places where you can buy fuel. And they are not open around the clock. Furnace Creek has one, Stovepipe Wells has one, Panamint Springs Resort has one on the far western edge. Furnace Creek sells the most expensive gasoline in the United States. When visitors came through in late 2023, the price was above $8 a gallon, nearly double what you would pay outside the park. That's not a typo. $8. People pay it because the alternative is pushing a dead car across a salt flat in 115 degrees Fahrenheit heat, which, when you frame it that way, actually makes $8 sound reasonable. Stovepipe Wells sells only 87 octane, no diesel. If you are driving anything that requires premium fuel or diesel, and a lot of people towing trailers or driving diesel trucks do, Stovepipe Wells cannot help you. Panamint Springs keeps limited hours. If you arrive at the wrong time, you are looking at the locked door of the one place that was supposed to save you, and you are calculating whether you have enough fuel to backtrack 60 miles to the next option. These 3 stations are separated by distances of roughly 25 to 30 miles along the main highway. But the main highway is not where people get into trouble. It is when they leave the main road that distances become lethal. A direct crossing of the park on Highway 190 runs about 131 miles. But tourists do not simply cross the park. They stop. They explore. They drive south to Badwater Basin. They wind up the narrow road to Dante's View. They venture onto the 40 miles of unpaved road to Racetrack Playa to see the sliding rocks, boulders that move across the dry lake bed on their own, apparently, because Death Valley decided flat-out heat wasn't interesting enough and added an enduring geological mystery just to keep people curious. Each detour adds miles. Each mile burns fuel. And here is the part people do not account for: the air conditioning. In Death Valley summer, you cannot turn it off. Without it, the interior of a car becomes dangerous within minutes. Your body overheats before your brain fully registers that it is happening. So you run the air conditioning on maximum, which means the engine works harder, which means the fuel burns faster. A car that gets 30 miles to the gallon on a San Diego freeway might get 20 in Death Valley. An RV or a truck towing a trailer might get 8 miles to the gallon, 3 gas stations, and you've already driven 40 miles off-road to see some rocks that move by themselves. Do the math before you go, because the desert will do it for you while you are standing next to a dead engine. And there is no cell service. You will lose signal 30 to 50 miles before you even reach the park boundary. Inside it, you might pick up a faint connection near Furnace Creek. That is it. If your car breaks down on a back road, you cannot call anyone. You cannot text your location. You cannot open a map on your phone. You are alone with whatever you have in the car, and the heat is already working on you. What heat does to a car. Most people believe that as long as the engine is running and the air conditioning works, they are safe in Death Valley. This is true until it is not. In temperatures above 110 degrees, the ambient air flowing over your engine is too hot to dissipate heat efficiently. The cooling system works harder. Fluids expand and can overwhelm seals. On the long climb out of the valley on Highway 190, the grade reaches 10% in places, steep enough that the National Park Service has posted signs telling drivers to turn off their air conditioning on the ascent to prevent engine overheating. Think about what that means. In a place where the air temperature is 120 degrees, the sign tells you to turn off the only thing keeping you alive inside the car. Because if you do not, the car itself will overheat and die. And then you are in a dead car in 120-degree air, on a 10% grade, with no cell service, on a road that 5 other cars might use in a given day. The car was your margin. You have just spent your margin. Tire pressure rises roughly 1 psi for every 10-degree increase in temperature. In Death Valley summer, pavement surface temperatures can reach 150 degrees. An underinflated tire or a worn tire flexes more under that heat, builds up internal pressure, and can blow out at highway speed. A blowout on a paved road with cell service is an inconvenience. A blowout on a dirt track in Death Valley with no spare, no signal, and 115-degree air temperature is a survival situation. And survival situations in this valley move fast. There is no grace period. The heat does not wait for you to figure out a plan. The people who didn't make it. I want to tell you about some specific people because the statistics, 68 deaths between 2007 and 2023, are too easy to set aside. Statistics live in a different part of your brain than stories do, so here are the stories. In July of 1996, a family of 4 German tourists arrived at Death Valley during a 3-week road trip across the American West. Egbert Rimkus was 34, an architect from Dresden. His girlfriend, Cornelia Meyer, was 27. With them were Egbert's 11-year-old son, Georg, and Cornelia's 4-year-old son, Max. They had rented a green Plymouth Voyager minivan in Los Angeles. They had been having a good trip. They stopped at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. They drove south along Badwater Road. They camped in Hanapa Canyon. The next day, Cornelia signed a visitor's log at an abandoned mining camp. Next to their names, she wrote that they would be heading over the pass. Almost certainly Mengel Pass, a rough mountain crossing that is difficult even for 4-wheel drive vehicles and is essentially impassable in a 2-wheel drive minivan. On a dirt track called Anvil Canyon Road, Egbert hit a rock at speed and blew a tire, then another, then a third. The Plymouth kept going on 3 flat tires for roughly 2 more miles before sinking to its axles and stopping for good. Looking at his map, Egbert would have seen that the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center lay roughly 8 or 9 miles to the south. He was a German. In Germany, military installations have fences, guards, patrols. You walk to the perimeter and someone finds you. What Egbert did not know, what nobody who has not been to this part of the Mojave would know, is that the China Lake facility covers over 1 million acres of open desert and is used primarily as a bombing range. There are no patrols, there is no perimeter fence. There is nothing out there but sand, rock, creosote bush, and occasionally live ordnance. Nobody reported the family missing for months. Their rental van was not found until October 21st, 3 months later, when a ranger in a helicopter spotted it during a routine aerial survey. An $80,000 search followed. Over 200 searchers on the ground and in the air for days. They found one thing: a single beer bottle under a bush, about 1.5 miles from the van. A ledge had been cleared in the sand next to it. Someone had sat there in the shade. Nothing else. For 13 years, nothing. Then a search and rescue worker named Tom Mayhood, who had been following the case since 1996, developed a theory. He believed the family had walked south, exactly where no official search team had looked, because they assumed no one would go that way. On November 12, 2009, Mayhood and his partner hiked into the area south of Goler Wash and started finding things: a day planner with writing in German, a wallet, an ID card, Cornelia Meyer, then bones. DNA testing confirmed Egbert Rimkus. Cornelia's passport was found nearby. As for Georg and Max, the 11-year-old and the 4-year-old, small bones were found in the area, but they had decayed too severely in 13 years of desert sun for DNA identification. Interpol still lists both children as missing. In August 2009, a 28-year-old nurse from Las Vegas named Alicia Sanchez took her 11-year-old son Carlos on a camping trip to Death Valley. She brought 24 16-ounce bottles of water, some cheese sandwiches, Pop-Tarts, and her Chihuahua. She had no maps. She relied entirely on the GPS in her Jeep Cherokee. The GPS directed her down a 30-mile dirt road in the far southwestern corner of the park. Near the end, where the road makes a sharp right, Alicia went left onto a track that appears on no park map. A short distance later, the Jeep dropped into a collapsed animal burrow and sank to its axles in sand. The temperature that week reached 119 degrees. 5 days passed. On the 5th day, Carlos died in the back of the Jeep. He was 11 years old. Alicia was found by a ranger the following morning, waving for help outside the vehicle. Her son's body was inside. In April 2021, Alexander Lofgren, a 32-year-old congressional aide and Afghanistan veteran, and his girlfriend Emily Henkel drove into Death Valley for a camping trip. They were experienced. They had filed a backcountry itinerary. They had survival whistles, thermal blankets, topographic maps they could read. On a remote stretch of Gold Valley Road, they hit a rock. 2 tires shredded simultaneously. They had 1 spare. They wrote a note and left it on the dashboard. 2 flat tires headed to Mormon Point have 3 days worth of water. The next morning, they tried to hike out through Willow Creek Canyon. Lofgren fell. Henkel climbed down to help. She fell too, shattering her ankle. Lofgren died in her arms 30 minutes later. For 6 days, Emily Henkel sat on a steep ledge in a desert canyon next to the body of the man she loved. With a broken ankle and dwindling water, using a solar panel to keep her phone charged so she could record goodbye messages to her family. She survived only because they had told people where they were going and when they would be back. The note on the dashboard told rescuers which direction to look. In July 2024, 6 German motorcyclists were riding through Death Valley about 2 miles south of Badwater Basin when several began showing signs of heat illness. The temperature that day was 128 degrees Fahrenheit. One man collapsed and could not be revived. Another lost consciousness and had to be carried by a passing stranger, not an ambulance, a stranger, 19 miles to Furnace Creek, where an ambulance drove him 62 miles to a hospital in Pahrump, Nevada, from which he was finally airlifted to Las Vegas. The emergency medical helicopters could not reach Furnace Creek that day. They cannot operate safely in air temperatures above 120 degrees. The heat affects rotor performance, reduces lift, makes flight dangerous. On the day a man was dying in the hottest place in America, the machines built to rescue people could not reach him because of the heat. A stranger, then a ground ambulance, then a helicopter to a small hospital, then another helicopter to a real one. That chain of events is what stands between you and death in Death Valley on a bad day. And on a good day, you will never know it exists. Why people keep getting it wrong. Every summer, the park receives a curious spike in visitors who come specifically to experience the heat. They fly to Las Vegas, rent a car, and drive 2.5 hours to Furnace Creek to photograph the thermometer. That is not a metaphor. People make this trip as a destination. The thermometer at Furnace Creek is, I am told, very photogenic. In 2024, even after the motorcyclist's death made national news, the parking lot at Badwater Basin was crowded. People posted selfies. Families brought children. Tour buses from Las Vegas arrived on schedule. The park does not close for heat. It posts warnings. It advises against hiking after 10 in the morning from June through September. It tells you to carry water and stay on paved roads. And then a man walks a 1-mile loop trail at Natural Bridge, 1 mile, well-marked and shaded in places, makes it back to his car, drives off a 20-foot embankment because the heat has made him too disoriented to steer, and dies in the parking lot with bystanders trying to get him into the shade. That was Peter Hayes Rubino, 57, of Los Angeles County. August 1st, 2024. 119 degrees. He completed the hike. He made it back to his car. People saw him stumble and offered help. His responses did not make sense. He got behind the wheel anyway. The car went over the embankment. Bystanders pulled him out. First responders arrived 20 minutes later. He was dead by 4:42 in the afternoon. Hyperthermia is not like other emergencies. It does not feel like an emergency when it is happening to you. It feels like confusion, mild disorientation, a strange difficulty focusing on what you were just doing. Your brain is the first thing to go, which is a design flaw of spectacular inconvenience because your brain is also the thing you need to recognize that something is wrong and make a decision to stop. By the time hyperthermia is obvious, it has already taken the tool you would use to respond to it. The GPS problem is related. People hand over navigation authority to a device that has no understanding of what the terrain actually is. A GPS sees a road. It does not see that the road is 30 miles of unmaintained dirt track in the southwestern corner of a park where the temperature will reach 119 degrees and there is no cell service and no one will come looking for a week. The GPS does not know any of that. It just knows it can route you there in approximately 45 minutes. The park's chief ranger said it plainly after Carlos Sanchez died. A GPS does not replace a map, a compass checking in at the visitor center and telling people where you are going to be. That is the whole system. That is all of it. And it is not complicated. It is just boring, and boring things are easy to skip when you are excited about a road trip. What the Timbisha knew. The Timbisha Shoshone have lived in Death Valley for at least 1,000 years, probably longer. They called it Tumpisa, the land of rock paint, for the red ochre clay in the hills. They did not call it Death Valley. That name belongs to the people who did not know how to live there. The Timbisha knew the springs. They knew which water sources were reliable in which seasons. They knew which plants could be eaten, which could be used medicinally, which indicated water underground. They knew where the shade was at each hour of the day. They built their villages at the mouths of canyons where mountain runoff created small patches of soil rich enough to farm. And crucially, they moved. They followed an annual cycle, valley floor in winter, mountain camps in summer, tracking the water and the shade as the seasons shifted the landscape. That last part is worth sitting with. Their survival strategy was not to conquer the valley, it was to accommodate it. They did not stay when it told them to go. They did not push through when the terrain said stop. They carried more than they thought they needed. They never assumed a water source was where they expected it to be, because the desert is not reliable, and reliability is something you bring with you or you do without. When the 49ers stumbled through in 1849, the wagon train that gave the valley its name, the Timbisha reportedly tried to help. They offered water to people who were dying of thirst in a landscape the Timbisha had navigated for centuries. The pioneers did not always accept the help. They did not understand what they were being offered, which was essentially the distilled survival knowledge of 1,000 years, handed to them for free by people who had already worked out every mistake the pioneers were about to make. One woman in that wagon train, as the survivors finally climbed out of the valley over the Panamints, turned back for a last look and said, "Goodbye, Death Valley." The name stuck because it earned itself. At least one person died in that valley, possibly more. The records are incomplete. 175 years later, the valley kills for the same reason. People arrive who have not learned what the Timbisha spent a millennium learning. The knowledge is available. It is posted at the visitor center. It is on the park's website. A ranger will tell you everything you need to know for free in the air-conditioned lobby of the visitor center before you drive anywhere. The Timbisha figured it out over generations of consequence. We have it handed to us at the door. And still. The fuel gauge is the whole lesson. Here's what I keep coming back to, across all of these stories. The catastrophe almost never starts with a catastrophe. It starts with something small, a gauge that was lower than it should have been, a turn onto the wrong road, a GPS signal suggesting a route no human should take, a flat tire, a rock in the road, a decision to keep going instead of turning back. Each of those is a decision that any of us would make on any other road in any other place, and nothing would happen. The gap between a minor inconvenience and a fatal emergency is not measured in miles in Death Valley. It is measured in gallons, in degrees, in bars of cell signal you do not have. The fuel gauge is where all of it begins because fuel is margin. A full tank is the buffer between a normal drive and a survival situation. It is the thing that lets you backtrack when the road gets bad. It is the thing that lets you run the AC on the long climb out without watching the temperature needle creep toward the red. It is the thing that gets you to Furnace Creek instead of stopping 8 miles short of it and trying to decide whether to walk. A full tank is not a guarantee, but an empty tank is a certainty. There are 3 gas stations in 5,270 square miles. One of them charges $8 a gallon. Pay it. Fill the tank there too. Fill it at every opportunity, not when the needle hits a quarter, not when the warning light comes on. Every time you see a pump with a price on it, you stop and you fill it. In Death Valley, $8 a gallon is not a ripoff. It is the market price of being in a place where the alternative to buying gas is dying. And the person selling gas knows that, and honestly, fair enough. There is a version of this lesson that sounds like common sense, and probably is, but common sense is a thing we apply to familiar situations. Death Valley is not a familiar situation. It looks like a drive. It looks like a road trip. The road is paved. The car has air conditioning. The map shows Furnace Creek right there, not that far, maybe an hour away. Everything about the experience up to the moment of the emergency looks like an ordinary afternoon. And then something small goes wrong, and the ordinary afternoon ends, and what comes next is determined entirely by the decisions you made before the small thing went wrong. Fill the tank. Every time. All the way to the top. Every time you pass a pump. That is the whole lesson. 175 years of this valley trying to teach it. The Timbisha knew it intuitively after 1,000 years of consequence. The 49ers learned it the hard way in 1849. The Rimkus family paid the highest possible price for not knowing it in 1996. Alicia Sanchez's son died because of accumulated small decisions that seemed reasonable in the moment. Alexander Lofgren died because 2 tires hit a rock on a road most people will never see. The sign on Badwater Road is still there. Next service is 72 miles. It is not advice, it is not a suggestion, it is the last clear sentence between you and one of the most inhospitable stretches of terrain on the surface of the earth. 72 miles of road where the ground can reach 200 degrees, where the air can reach 130, where the pavement shimmers and the mountains recycle the heat back down onto you, where there is no cell service and no water and no shade and no one knows where you are. The valley has been making its case since before it had a name. The ground does not care. The heat does not wait. The fuel gauge does not lie. The needle sits where it sits. Everything else follows from there.